go. It is now 6 p.m. and I'm calling this regularly scheduled meeting of the San Bernardino County Planning Commission to order. If we could please read the procedures.
The San Bernardino County Planning Commission welcomes your comments. When addressing the commission via Zoom, phone, or in chambers, please state your name and county in which you reside for the record. Please address the commission as a whole through the chair. If participating via Zoom, select the Participants tab and click the Raise Hand icon. If you are using a phone, please press star 9 to raise your hand. When your turn arrives, you will hear that you have been unmuted. If you are participating in person at the chambers, please complete a speaker card identifying the item on which you wish to speak and provide your completed card to the clerk prior to consideration of the item. Speaker cards are available on the table at the entrance to the chambers. Thank you.
Thank you. Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Ringhayden, if you could please lead us in the pledge. Thank you. If we could have a roll call, please.
Absolutely. District number 1, Vincent Ringhayden.
Present.
District number 2, Richard Way.
Present.
District number 3, Robert Scaliotti.
Present.
District number 4, Robert Gibson.
Present.
District number 5, Celeste Toledo Bocanegra.
Present.
All commissioners present, and we have a quorum.
Thank you. There was one item omitted between items 3 and 4, so I will go ahead and add that as department announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. Normally, I come up before you at a regular planning commission meeting to let you know any discretionary application that has come in between now and the previous planning commission meeting. We have none, but we do want to tell you a little bit about some upcoming special meetings that we have planned, and so we'll have Ariel Goodspeed, our principal planner, address the commission.
Hi, good evening, Chair and fellow commissioners. If you could pull up the screen, please. So our first special meeting coming up is going to be on April 30th at 3 o'clock here at the board chambers. It's a joint meeting with both the Planning Commission and the board, and it's to go over our housing element update overview, and it's before we release the public draft of the housing element. Then we will have our normal Planning Commission meeting on the third Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Currently, what we have tentative on schedule is updated zoning code, Title 23, depending on the discussion that happens tonight, and updated discussion on the stormwater retention. On the 21st will be another joint Planning Commission and board meeting here at the chambers at 3 o'clock. It will be after the release of the public draft of the housing element, so it's only going over the housing element public draft. The next day, on May 22nd at 6 o'clock at Payne's Banquet Room, is going to be a town hall. It's going to be in person, not Zoom, and it will, with the public, go over the housing element public draft. We're also going to have some tabling and presentation on some pieces of the general plan, and then also San Bernardino County's impact fees. So we hope to see the public and commissioners there as well. And then in June is just our regular Planning Commission meeting. And that's all I have for you tonight. Any questions?
Any questions from the commission? No. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. Okay. Thank you. Any public comment? This is for any items that are under the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission but not on this evening's agenda.
Chair, I have no public comment in chambers or via Zoom.
Thank you. Public comment is closed. Consent agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
I make a motion we adopt the consent agenda.
I'll second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0. Thank you. Public hearing, item 6.1.
We'll have our assistant planner, Jonathan Olivas, present the minor subdivision.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Jonathan Olivas, Assistant Planner with San Benito County. This evening, I will be presenting PLN 230014, minor subdivision at 6500 Santa Ana Valley Road. Our discussion tonight will cover project location, description, CEQA, land use, and staff recommendations. The site is approximately 9 miles southeast of downtown Hollister, about a half a mile to the south of the intersection of John Smith Road and Santa Ana Valley Road. The project is located in a rural area surrounded by mostly agricultural land uses, with some rural housing in the vicinity. The project proposes to subdivide an existing 49.99 acre lot into two lots of 15 acres and 34.99 acres respectively. Parcel 1 has the existing house, 2 existing wells, and a septic system, with access off Santa Ana Valley Road. Parcel 2 is undeveloped agricultural land with a access via an easement off John Smith Road. It is also worth noting that this subdivision changes very little about what entitlements would be allowed, as the zoning already allows nearly the same degree of use without the subdivision. The image on screen shows the aforementioned easement in favor of Parcel 2 off of John Smith Road. This image shows the southern portion of Parcel 1 and indicates the locations of the wells for Parcel 2 and Parcel 1, along with the existing house and septic system. This photo shows the project site facing north towards Santa Ana Valley from the middle of the project site. This photo shows the project site facing west, with Ridgemark just beyond the hills in the distance. This photo shows the project site facing south towards Kinsabe Road just beyond the hills. And this photo shows the project site facing east towards Santa Ana Valley Road with the Diablo Range in the distance. Okay, so general plan. The purpose underlying the A general plan designation is to uphold agricultural productivity, particularly on prime farmland, encompassing various productive land types such as crops, vineyards, and grazing areas. This designation permits agricultural support uses, essential facilities, and one primary residential unit per lot, all in aid of preserving agricultural viability. For the zoning, the intent of the AP zoning designation is to facilitate diverse agricultural activities as articulated in the general plan, which includes supporting agricultural-related activities like vineyards, wineries, and associated uses. Additionally, it allows for limited low-density residential development while prioritizing the preservation of prime farmland. This project is consistent with both the general plan and zoning designations. This project is most notably consistent with general plan policy LU 3.1, which is agricultural diversification. This policy directs the county to commit to sustaining and promoting agricultural operations. This project aligns with these goals by maintaining the current agricultural use, which involves cultivating row crops and orchards. This property will remain in the California Land Conservation Act, or the Williamson Act, and will continue its existing agricultural uses, which is further consistent with General Plan Policy LU 3.14, land trust and financial incentives. As stated earlier, this proposal primarily revolves around delineating new property boundaries and does not include plans for new construction. The current zoning regulations already allow for nearly the same level of land use as what could occur with or without this subdivision. Okay, this project qualifies for a common sense exemption from the California Environmental Quality Act. It assures that the proposed subdivision will not significantly impact the environment, no ground disturbance or construction activities are proposed, and the project will not disrupt ecologically sensitive areas. The existing zoning regulations already permit similar land use activities. The project further qualifies for an existing facilities exemption as it involves maintenance, repair, or minor alteration of existing infrastructure without expanding the current use. Additionally, the project qualifies for a minor alterations to land exemption, as the required improvements will occur on slopes less than 10% with no impact on trees, fault zones, or protected wetlands. As stated earlier, this proposal primarily revolves around delineating new property boundaries and does not include plans for new construction. The current zoning regulations already allow for nearly the same level of land use as what could occur with or without this subdivision. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission review the staff report, review the attached draft resolution, including findings and conditions of approval, receive public comment, and adopt the resolution, including findings, to approve minor subdivision parcel map PLN 230014, subject to the conditions of approval found in the resolution. Any questions?
Thank you. Before we go to the applicant or the representatives, are there any questions from the commission to staff?
I have none at this time.
None? Okay. Do we have a representative for the applicant?
Yes, Ann Hall is online. Ann, you have been promoted to panelist. You can unmute yourself.
Good evening.
Good evening.
This is Ann Hall. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate Jonathan's work on this project. I do have a couple comments on conditions. And the first one, I'm going to go backwards. I want to start with condition 27, which is the requirement to underground utilities. As we've discussed before, undergrounding utilities is going to be a very expensive requirement, and I'm not sure on a road like Santa Ana Valley Road to underground one pole in the midst of that is of great benefit to the county. I'm not sure that the cost benefit makes sense. So we would request that the condition to underground utilities along Santa Ana Valley Road be waived. The next one is item 24, the fair share contribution. I don't believe this applies to their property. I've had some discussion with Public Works, and I will let them speak for themselves, but I think they agree this does not apply to the property here. I question that belongs on this project. And then finally, 22 has to do with frontage improvements. First, there's an A and a B. B references frontage improvement on John Smith Road. This property doesn't have any frontage on John Smith Road, so I don't believe B applies. A is talking about half of a 28-foot on 38-foot roadbed along the Santa Ana Valley frontage. On behalf of the applicant, I'm going to say this is not in line with the scope of this subdivision. I understand road improvements are a topic of some interest, but again, given the fact that nothing is really changing here, we would ask consideration for this 22A to be deferred. Do you have any questions for me?
Do the commissioners have any questions for the applicant's representative at this time? Not at this time. Okay. Steve, if you could comment on item 24, please.
Yes, good evening, commissioners. So yes, Public Works did look at that fair share, and this fair share applies to vehicles that are closer to Fairview in Santa Ana, whereas this property is actually closer to Santa Ana and John Smith. So Public Works concurs that condition 24 can be waived because vehicles that are going to access property are just going to drive down John Smith to Fairview. So
Okay.
it can be waived.
Thank you. Public comment. Is there any public comment for this item?
There is no public comment in chambers or via Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Public comment is closed. Back to the commission. Do you have any questions? I have a couple of questions, but do any other commissioners have any questions? Okay, this would be for Jonathan. Condition 22, it references a prior deferred improvement agreement, and it says, and it has been triggered by the sale of parcel 1. If the parcel doesn't exist, how can it be sold?
From the research that I did on the previous subdivision, it was originally 5 larger parcels that were together, and this parcel was not like a remainder or anything like that, so it could be legally sold or any of those other things. the agreement originally applied to them as a whole, but now that they are individual owners, I believe there's some leeway in that. Steve might be able to comment further on the agreement itself.
Oh, this was when the other piece around was broken up, where the pomegranates and everything are? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Wade, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's kind of a nit, but with regard to item 27, undergrounding the utilities, if we, I'm not convinced. I'm not a lawyer, obviously. I'm not convinced of the need to remove it and still allow them not to underground the particular utilities, because it says specifically in item 27 that it can be waived by the Planning Commission. So we could leave that in there and simply add a statement to the effect that we are waiving that, if that's the will of the commission.
Council, is that acceptable, just to make us add a statement to the bottom of condition 27 that we hereby waive that condition? Or do we just delete it? What is the preference of council? Or what is the standard?
It sits, where's,
I mean,
And it could be moot. I mean, maybe we don't want to eliminate the need to underground. I'm just saying, if the will of the commission is to eliminate it.
Out
Yeah.
there, there's no reason to do that.
no,
There's
no,
reason to do that.
there's no reason way out there.
Okay, then
Yeah, you-
it's just a question of
Just delete the entire-
verbiage.
yeah, you can leave it in there and waive it. It's the pleasure of the commission, essentially. Yeah, you
Either-
could strike
either way
it
is
or
fine.
waive it. Either way is
Maybe
fine.
delete it.
Yep.
Okay,
Easier, less confusing.
Just delete number 27, in my opinion.
Yeah.
okay.
And the same with 24, the fair share contribution. The county engineer says it doesn't apply. In 22, I would like to adopt something that we did with another parcel that was subdivided, the Brigantino subdivision at the corner of John Smith and Santa Ana Valley, that basically adds language that says that it's a deferred roadway improvement agreement. The applicant and owner shall enter into a deferred roadway improvement agreement in form and substance acceptable to the county engineer and county council. The agreement shall require that should any future subdivision occur with respect to the subject property, comma, upon development, comma, the applicant or owner shall be responsible for promptly constructing roadway improvements along the entire property frontage on Santa Ana Valley Road, including but not limited to full width of asphaltic concrete on the full aggregate base, as well as any and all ancillary improvements to effectuate the purposes of the Subdivision Map Act, County Code, and applicable law. The design of the improvements shall comply with or exceed County Code improvement standards at the time of construction. The agreement shall be recorded with the county recorder at the expense of the subdivider and or owner, and shall constitute notice to all successors and assigns of title to the real property of the obligations set forth therein. The terms applicant and owner include respectively not only the applicant and the present owner of the real property, but also heirs, successors, executors, administrators, and assigns thereof, it being the intent of the parties that the obligations in the agreement shall run with the real property. The agreement shall not relieve the applicant or owner from any other specific requirements of the Subdivision Map Act, County Code, or law. So that basically pretty much everything from the Brigantino, but obviously we delete the portions that mention John Smith Road, since this property doesn't abut John Smith.
Yes, it does.
Not this one.
Bring the map up, please.
There's an easement running through it to get there, but it doesn't abut John Smith, because Tobias or somebody owns that little
See
strip
map,
there.
could you please pull up the screen?
Tobias. Yeah, it because it goes along. Yeah, it doesn't abut John Smith. There's an easement to get to it, parcel 2, through John Smith, but the property itself doesn't abut it. It's just an easement.
Okay, I apologize.
I don't. There's no way to. Did we get all the language for that condition on the record?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. So is that acceptable to the commission, that we replace the language of 22 with what I read into the record? If we strike condition 24 and 27, And is that acceptable to the applicants, the deferred improvement agreement? Does Ann want to comment?
Yes, I believe a deferred improvement agreement is acceptable to the applicants. We had discussed it earlier. I believe the applicants are also present, if you want to confirm that with them.
We're good to go? Okay, the applicants are agreeing. Okay. So that motion is on. Does anybody want to make that motion with? Sure.
I have one question. I can't help but notice that parcel 1 matches the FEMA flooding path, floodplain. Was that intentional, or is that just how the land goes?
That would be an Ann question.
Parcel 1.
Could you put the map back up? Because I don't believe parcel 1 exactly matches that.
Okay, maybe.
The line going between the parcels is that straight line in the middle.
Right.
And the FEMA floodway is the shaded area. So there's a portion of both parcels that have a flood area.
Okay, and if it happens to be sold, I'm sure then the individuals buying the property would be notified of that area.
Oh yeah.
Right?
They have to know
Yeah.
if there's a floodplain. It has to be disclosed.
Thank you.
Okay.
For the floodplain, it's also a non-buildable area as well, and that would go with the map, so the future owner would be aware.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So is there a motion on the table with the previous discussed language?
Yeah, I'll move that we adopt, that we approve the use permit with the striking of item 27, striking item 24, and replacing item 22 with the verbiage that Chair Gibson has read into the record.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0. Thank you all very much. Next item. Six point two.
Good evening again, Chair and Commissioners. Jonathan Levis, Assistant Planner. I'll be presenting PLN 230046, minor subdivision at Edwards Drive. Our discussion tonight will cover the project location, description, CEQA, land use consistency, and staff recommendations. The site is approximately 2 miles northeast of downtown Hollister, about 2,800 feet north of the intersection of Kane Drive and Santa Ana Road. The project is located in a predominantly suburban and rural housing development area. The project proposes to subdivide an existing 5.43 acre lot into 3 lots of 2.82 acres, 1.13 acres, and 1.03 acres respectively. Parcel 1 has an existing shared well for parcels 1, 2, and 3, and is otherwise undeveloped. Parcel 2 is undeveloped land, and Parcel 3 is also undeveloped land. It is also worth noting that this subdivision changes very little about what entitlements would be allowed, as the zoning already allows nearly the same degree of use without the subdivision. And no new construction is proposed. The image on the screen indicates the location of the existing shared well for parcels 1, 2, and 3, the existing PG&E easement, and the road easement dedication for the future Edgewood Drive to Daffodil connection. The image on screen shows the project site facing west towards Hollister. This photo shows the project site facing south towards Hollister and John Cool Lane. This photo shows the project site facing east towards the Diablo Range. This photo shows the project site facing north, and just beyond the houses lies McCloskey Road, with Pacheco Peak off in the distance. Okay, and the general plan, the RR general plan designation aims to accommodate large lot rural residential homes in the areas of the county generally unsuitable for productive agricultural development. Typically, these properties lack public infrastructure such as water, sewer, and drainage. As for the zoning, the RR zoning designation aims to allow a mix of housing and limited agricultural uses, with single-family dwellings as the primary focus and agricultural uses playing a secondary role. This zoning category applies to areas near urban services with a maximum density of 1 dwelling unit per acre unless public sewer and water services are available. The project is consistent with both the general plan and the zoning designations. The project site is most notably consistent with General Plan Policy LU 4.2, Urban Residential Development, which directs the county to ensure that new urban residential development occurs in areas with access to adequate public facilities and services. The project site is situated near established major subdivisions like Santa Ana Estates and the Villages. The project additionally is in close proximity to Santa Ana Road and Highway 25, which is consistent with LU 4.2's direction to develop near transportation networks, transit routes, and employment centers. The project's dedication of right-of-way for the future expansion conforms to General Plan Policies C-1.9, which is dedicated right-of-way, and C-110, street network plans, which stipulate that future development, if any, must contribute to an interconnected street network and accommodate the extension and connection of streets in the project neighborhood. The dedication of the right-of-way as part of this project's tentative map includes a future connection that would facilitate a link between Edgewood Drive and Daffodil Drive. As stated earlier, this proposal primarily revolves around delineating new property boundaries and does not include plans for new construction. The current zoning regulations already allow for nearly the same level of land use as what would occur with or without the subdivision. The project qualifies for a common sense exemption from the California Environmental Quality Act. It assures that the proposed subdivision will not significantly impact the environment, no ground disturbance or construction activities are proposed, and the project will not disrupt ecologically sensitive areas. The existing zoning regulations already permit similar land use activities. The project further qualifies for an existing facilities exemption as it involves maintenance, repair, or minor alteration of existing infrastructure without expanding the current use. The project necessitates a minor extension of Edgewood Drive to fulfill the existing public works conditions outlined in County Code Title 23, subdivisions. This extension, spanning 271 feet, aligns with requirements for road improvements without altering the existing road network. It maintains the same property access without increasing traffic lanes or capacity, ensuring compliance with County Code Chapters 23.17 and 23.29 while meeting exemption criteria. Additionally, the project qualifies for a minor alterations to land exemption as the required improvements will occur on slopes less than 10%, with no impact on trees, fault zones, or protected wetlands. As stated earlier, this proposal primarily revolves around delineating new property boundaries and does not include plans for new construction. The same level of land use as what could occur with or without this subdivision. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission review the staff report, review the attached draft resolution, including findings and conditions of approval, receive public comment, adopt the resolution, including findings to approve minor subdivision parcel map PLN 230046, subject to the conditions of approval found in the resolution. Any questions?
Thank you. Before we go to the applicant's representative, do the commissioners have any questions for staff? Seeing none, Anne, would you like to say anything?
I am here on behalf of the applicant if you have questions, but overall, we've discussed this with Jonathan and with Public Works, and we have no issue with the conditions as proposed.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of the applicant or the representatives before we go to public comment?
No.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Commissioner Scagliotti.
On the frontage improvements, it says bond or make the following roadway improvements. When do they plan to make the roadway improvements? Now, or when they go to build, or are they gonna bond it now?
So and Steve could probably expand on that a little bit more, but basically the answer would be that they can do either, according to the condition as it stands.
Prior to recordation of the parcel map. So before the final map
Correct.
is recorded, they have to make the improvements.
Correct.
And they can't sell a lot until the final map is recorded? Okay. So before they can sell it, basically.
Okay. And then drainage and stormwater retention. What's the plan for that? Is it gonna be 100% kept on site for the 3 lots?
Or does that,
they plan on doing for that?
flow to the city system?
Does that go to city drain, city sewer system, or how does that work?
So regarding the existing drainage or the proposed lots and drainage, they'll just have to conform to our code, which is they can't increase flows with impervious surface. I mean, they don't have a site plan, so they would just, the street would just flow to the system, to the city system. But on site, they have to propose buildings or driveways or things, and then they have to comply with.
So you might have to have a retention pond on each lot.
Yes, typically for these type of lots, they end up with a smaller detention pond kind of near the street, just a little basin, basically. It's typically
Okay.
what occurs.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Is there any public comment for this item?
There is no public comment in chambers or via Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Public comment is closed. Back to the commission. What is the will of the commission? Okay, is there a motion to,
I motion we adopt the resolution as stands.
okay.
I'll
Sir?
second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0. Thank you. Next item, 6.3. Council.
Can you bring it on the screen too? Good evening, Commissioners. Sean Cameron, Assistant County Counsel. Bringing back the proposed ordinance amendment with respect to the Planning Commission duties. So the change that was made after the last meeting was with respect to subdivision F, to remove the word county and to add within the county of San Benito. So it would read, the Planning Commission shall communicate with other advisory bodies concerned with planning matters within the county of San Benito. Otherwise, I think it's exactly the same as proposed at the previous meeting.
Okay, fantastic. Do we have any questions of staff, or shall we move to public comment? If we could open up public comment, please.
I have no public comment in chambers or via Zoom.
Okay, public comment is closed. Back to the commission. Do we have any discussion, or is there a motion on the table?
I make a motion that we pass this resolution.
Okay, is there a
I'll second.
second? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the docket. Regular agenda 7.1, discussion of low impact camping on private land. Receive a presentation from Hip Camp. If desired, provide staff direction.
Okay, we have Cassandra Pren, Cassandra online. Sorry, I can't pronounce her last name. Cassandra, I'll let you take it away.
That's okay.
She's going to present via Zoom.
No worries. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Gibson and San Benito County Planning Commission for having me this evening. My name is Cassandra Pren Basilikis, and I'm here today from Hip Camp to talk about low impact camping on private land. And I am going to share my screen, though I have been having a Chrome challenge, so you have to let me know if you can see it, and if not, I may ask for some screen sharing support.
You got it.
Thank you.
And we can see it.
Fantastic. Let's see if I can get it to... Are the slides moving for you?
No.
Okay. I think I'm having a Chrome freeze. 1 second, please. I apologize.
We are prepared to present on our end if you just tell us when to progress through the slides.
Sure thing. Let's do that. That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, Cassandra, you're good to go.
Thank you so much. So again, I'm Cassandra. I'm here today from HIP Camp. I want to say thank you to Chair Gibson and to the San Benito County Planning Commission for having me, as well as to county staff for your support and input on this topic and presentation. I'll use our time together this evening to share some context on trends in the outdoor industry, what we're seeing, and have an opportunity to anticipate. I'll introduce you to HIP Camp and to the concept of low-impact camping. And I'll dig into the opportunity that low-impact camping represents in San Benito County. I'll also talk through some policy considerations that I've heard are top of mind for this community, as well as some that have been priorities in other jurisdictions discussing this land use. Next slide, please. Okay, so the outdoor recreation industry and demand for new places to get outside is growing in the United States. Last year, we saw a record high with 168 million participants, which is represents 8 years of consecutive growth in the industry, which is really exciting. And that growth also meant record economic output. So the outdoor recreation industry generated 1.1 trillion in economic output last year. And nowhere has this growth and demand for the outdoors been felt more acutely than in California. California continues to lead the industry with more people getting outside, more jobs created, and more economic impact than anywhere else in the country, which is really exciting. We at HIP Camp are on a mission to get more people outside. We want more people connecting with nature, and we know that outdoor recreation and the outdoor recreation industry has the power to drive sustainable economic growth while protecting and expanding access to the benefits of the outdoors for everyone. But camping specifically is one of the fastest growing segments of this industry, and it's one that we know is really constrained by infrastructure and supply. Next slide, please. The volume of campers is affecting the experience, and it's impacting the environment. And we aren't positioned to benefit fully from the influx of new people into this space. Almost half of campers indicated that they felt negatively impacted by and were planning to change their behavior because of how many people there are in the spaces we currently have for outdoor recreation. It's hard to get reservations, campgrounds and trailheads are more crowded than ever, and the demand for the outdoors and specifically for camping is really outpacing the infrastructure we have to support it. And I think Pinnacles National Park is a great example. Visitation doubled between 2020 and 2021 alone, while the number of local overnight accommodations hasn't kept pace. We need solutions in California to address this challenge and opportunity. Next slide, please. And HIP Camp can be one of them. So HIP Camp is a bit of a case study for the purposes of this presentation to illustrate some of the impacts we've seen with low-impact camping. But HIP Camp is a platform, one of many, that enables local landowners to advertise new and unique places for people to stay, camp, and get outside. From private campgrounds and RV parks to farm stays, individual tent and RV sites, cabins, yurts, canvas tents, you name it. The sites listed on HIP Camp are located on properties that are owned and managed by land trusts, on working cattle ranches, on small family farms. Next slide, please. And HIP Camp hosts are welcoming folks to their properties across all 50 states, Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom. So we're very familiar with this land use and with some of the benefits and challenges that come with it. It's a model, our platform's model is one you're likely already familiar with. So landowners sign up with HIP Camp as hosts. They create an online profile for their property, which shows the area available for campers. And those campers sign up with HIP Camp and are able to search by location and book on our website and mobile app. Hosts have full control of their availability and pricing. They can collect the applicable taxes, and they're paid weekly for the stays booked through HIP Camp. And then on our platform specifically, we take a 10% commission, which covers the administrative side of hosting, from credit card transaction fees to liability insurance, up to $1 million per occurrence. Next slide, please. And this map shows every dot that represents an individual organization hosting with HIP Camp. Next slide, please. These folks are thoughtful neighbors and environmental stewards. They're longstanding members of their community, and they're deeply invested in protecting their property and their neighbors. So the folks we partner with are welcoming folks to the land they live on, the land their livelihood is tied to, and they take the time to educate visitors about responsible recreation in the area. They're available to lend a hand if somebody has a question, and they're very generous with their local knowledge. Next slide, please. This is just one example. Kenny has more than 800 acres in northern San Luis Obispo County. Water restrictions in Kenny's area have meant that rather than growing grapes like folks in neighboring parts of the county, he's making a living off of grain and cattle, off of growing grain and cattle. It's getting harder and harder to do that in a way that is economically viable. And hosting a small number of campers is one way that he's diversified his income and been able to keep his property intact. Next slide, please. Because we've learned that this is a really lucrative source of revenue for private landowners. HipCamp hosts in California, and I'll zoom in on San Luis Obispo County, or pardon me, on San Benito County in a moment here. But HipCamp hosts in California earned $6 million last year, and they use the money that they earn hosting campers to pay their property taxes, make mortgage payments, subsidize small businesses, keep farms and ranches operational like Kenny, and make ends meet on fixed income. And their guests drove $39 million in economic impact for the surrounding communities. So they're patronizing small businesses, taking local recommendations for where to eat and drink. And these are just the numbers that we've seen through HipCamp, I should say. There are some industry reports. Campgrounds of America puts out a great one that reported last year that an estimated $52 billion was spent by campers in local communities. So outdoor recreation and overnight stays specifically can drive real economic impact. Next slide, please. And I'll zoom in a bit to California here. I want to talk about what we mean when we say low impact camping. Next slide, please. So when you picture campsites or a campground, you probably picture something like a state park campground or a private RV park. In the US, traditional campgrounds have an average of 124 sites and a range of amenities and infrastructure to support that number of guests: laundry rooms, parking lots, bathhouses, convenience stores. And when we say low impact camping, we're talking about much smaller camping areas that require less infrastructure, generate less traffic, and typically have less on-site development than your traditional camping uses. Some of the photos that you can see on this slide are great examples of what low impact camping can look like. It's typically an incidental secondary use on the land. It's the kind of camping compatible with agricultural production, for example. Landowners can set up a handful of campsites that can be moved depending on what parts of their property are in production, and they don't need to build and develop the property to be successful. So there's a lower barrier to entry. Next slide, please. But what we've learned is that the regulations that we currently have to support camping activities tend to be more appropriate for that larger scale use. And they're often out of step with what we're seeing as kind of a new way of camping, as well as with community goals around preserving open space, rural economic development for rural landowners. So we have an opportunity to build something specific, accessible, clear, and beneficial to support low-impact camping locally. Next slide, please. And we're seeing in California an initiative at the state level to do just that. So at the state level in California, Senate President Mike McGuire has introduced Senate Bill 620, which is the Low Impact Camping Areas Act. It creates a new category of camping at the state level for these areas. It introduces a new framework and guidelines for this type of land use, and it differentiates these low-impact uses from large-scale commercial campgrounds and RV parks. So if campgrounds meet a new definition of low-impact camping area, they only are required to pursue a local permit and would be exempted from a state permit to operate. And this would affirm local control over low-impact camping on private lands, but you would still need local approval, of course. And it would reduce barriers to entry for landowners who are interested in offering these types of camping areas on their properties. So as long as they meet the state definition for low-impact camping and they're approved by their local government, they wouldn't need to pursue an expensive and time-intensive state permit. Next slide, please. And a camping area would have to meet these criteria to be eligible at the state. So this is the current language of the low impact camping ordinance would differentiate commercial campgrounds from low impact camping areas at 9 sites. So if you have 9 sites or fewer, you would be under local jurisdiction, and you would be considered a low-impact camping area. The bill would also introduce a floor for these types of uses, like a 2-acre minimum, a provision that would mean that if you had a smaller property, you could only have a certain number of sites, 2 acres, for example, 2 campsites. And it has some provisions around requiring off-street parking, having a property manager that is available, and ensuring that these operators are compliant with all relevant local regulations too. Next slide, please. So zooming in a bit to San Benito County, next slide, please. There's an opportunity, and what we've heard from the board and from interested community members is that this could be something that is really a boon for rural economic development, that can create affordable overnight stays that don't compete with the rental or housing market, that provides an increase in access to what might otherwise be overly expensive or competitively popular destinations, and that supports rural landowners in land management and conservation goals. So what we're hearing, not only in San Benito County, but across California, is a desire to make sure land use codes and permitting systems are in place to keep pace with new and popular uses that represent exciting opportunities for the community. Next slide, please. So in San Benito County specifically, low-impact camping is an affordable option for visitors. It requires little to no infrastructure, as we've discussed, and those destinations start at $30 a night, which is quite affordable, especially if you consider having between 4 and 6 people at each campsite. It's a lucrative revenue stream for local landowners. In the last 12 months, the average host in California earned more than $7,500 on Hip Camp, and in San Benito County, in that area, that's closer to $8,500. And it's an economic opportunity for the region. So we have some of the big national and state numbers, but we know that each Hip Camper spends several $100s each at their destination when they travel through Hip Camp. Next slide, please. And we wanted to learn more about economic impact, and this is an example from Mendocino County. We commissioned Earth Economics, which is an external firm, to conduct an analysis of the benefits provided by Hip Camp properties and hosting activities in specific areas. So they looked at how spending in one industry, the outdoor recreation industry, translates to additional spending in related industries, and the cumulative effect of that spending on the regional economy. And they found that when folks are booking and staying through Hip Camp, the spending in the local community they're staying in leads to additional spending within the region by businesses and employees. So every dollar spent is multiplied and directly supports jobs and infuses the local economy with tourism dollars. Next slide, please. So there's a real opportunity here to support a land use and make it for the community more accessible by providing an affordable permitting pathway for folks who are interested in trying something like this on their properties, making it inclusive of accommodation types from tent and RV sites to camping structures like yurts and on-site camper vans, and making it really robust to ensure that it's well managed. So site standards in place for everything from waste disposal to noise. And that brings me to the next slide, where we'll start to go through some specific policy considerations. Next slide, please. So on policy considerations, this is not an exhaustive list, but I've broken it into 3 categories. The first is property type, the second is operating standards, and the third is approval process. So on property type, when we talk about property type, we're typically referring to community compatibility, making sure these activities are happening on properties where it's appropriate. And one way to approach that is by establishing a minimum acreage requirement. So, for example, and I'll share some examples from other counties that are working on this land use in case that's helpful. In Santa Cruz, they have a draft that would set a 5-acre minimum to maintain consistency with other county regulations and ensure community compatibility. Whereas in Mendocino County, they have smaller parcels that may be a better fit, and the board is interested in allowing a very small number of sites on properties as small as 2 acres. So there are different approaches to minimum acreage when it comes to allowing low-impact camping, and every community is going to be quite different. Setbacks are another way of ensuring community compatibility. So setbacks from property lines and from off-site residences are what we hear about most often. Santa Cruz's draft proposes a 200-foot setback from off-site residences, for example, and I believe they're discussing setbacks from specific habitats and natural resources as well. Santa Barbara County is also having a detailed conversation about setbacks for small-scale camping uses on agricultural properties specifically, and they're discussing setbacks from adjacent agricultural activities rather than property lines. So again, there are many different ways to go about this depending on what you are wanting to manage for on these types of properties and these uses. And then, of course, zoning is another consideration, and we typically see counties interested in allowing this use on agricultural land, rural and rural residential land, open space, recreational zoning, etc. Moving into operating standards, next slide, please. Again, not an exhaustive list, but just the ones that we hear about most often and have heard about in San Benito County as well. So these typically include occupancy considerations. You hear a lot of people talk about site number, right? The low impact camping threshold is number of sites. But I think number of people is important to consider as well. So if you allow 5 sites with up to 6 people per site, for example, I think thinking about how many total people could be on a property at any given time is important. In Santa Cruz, I believe they're considering 8 people per site. In Tehama County, which has an agri-nature tourism ordinance, the permit level is dependent on how many people you expect to welcome on average per day and per week. So there are different ways of thinking through that type of policy. On types of camping, I've touched on this a bit, but we're seeing counties include tent and RV sites, as well as camping structures like canvas tents and yurts. And a reason for that is that it broadens the pool of people who will be able to experience and benefit from this land use. People who are flying in, for example, to visit a national park, or who don't have access to their own equipment. I know my family tends to use structure as a filter on hip camp because they want to sleep on a bed. So it makes the outdoors a bit more accessible for more people to have different options. Fire safety is a topic that we spend quite a bit of time on. Understandably, it's a major concern both for our company, for our landowner partners, and for the local communities that are considering these ordinances. And we typically see them require that these private land campsites adhere to any and all applicable state and local regulations. Though there are communities that restrict solid fuel burning on these properties, or may otherwise get more restrictive depending on their specific needs. On hip camp, we have a fire ban tool. So a landowner, maybe there's a red flag warning, or they just don't want to have campfires on their property, or there may be a fire ban in place for recreational fires. They can turn their fire ban on, and every camper with an upcoming booking will get a text that lets them know about the change and about the rules for fire safety on that property. So whatever the fire safety regulations are in an area, platforms like HipCamp can help message and educate. On infrastructure, something that we hear quite a bit is that folks want to allow these uses with minimal infrastructure to lower the barrier to entry and to keep it compatible with rural and undeveloped areas and agricultural lands. So for restrooms, that typically means self-contained or portable restrooms that can be serviced. Each county has their own approach here, and traditional septic with the appropriate permits is, of course, an option as well. And then the other item on operating standards that I've heard as a topic in San Benito and elsewhere is noise. So we've seen most counties defer to existing noise ordinances. I think Santa Cruz's draft ordinance does that currently, but they also have a line about how the activities on the property cannot produce noise, dust, odors, or I think vibrations that can impact adjacent parcels. So again, each county is going to be managing and referencing their specific code as they think through how they want to support and manage these uses. Next slide, please. And then on the approval process, what we've heard in San Benito County, and in others is a desire to keep it affordable, as I've mentioned. So that typically looks like an administrative permit or some other ministerial option. I believe in Mendocino, for example, they're taking a tiered approach, and the permit you will need to pursue will be dependent on the number of sites you want to have. So I think they'll start with a business license and increase from there. In Trinity County, I believe the permit level is dependent on how many days you host out of the calendar year. And in Tehama County, as I mentioned, the permit, it depends on the number of people. So I believe if you have 100 and some people or fewer on average per week, you're looking at an administrative permit. So, so many different ways of thinking this through, and every county, again, is going to have their own unique set of standards and requirements. And then on occupancy tax, HipCamp enables landowners to collect the appropriate tax on each booking, and counties like Tehama County require TOT certificates as part of the approval process, and Santa Cruz's current draft, for example, also requires TOT registration as part of their approval process as well. So it's a non-exhaustive but an overview of some of the policy considerations that we hear being prioritized in other areas and that we've heard are top of mind for the community in San Benito County, and hopefully examples from other jurisdictions are helpful as you start to think about what shape this could take to meet the needs of your specific community. Next slide, please. And to close, just want to highlight some of what I've shared throughout the presentation. Thanks for being so generous with me. Low impact camping can play a big role in supporting and growing San Benito County's tourism and outdoor recreation economies. It can enable local landowners, including and especially farmers and ranchers, to diversify income and generate sustainable revenue, which can really offset what we know to be the rising costs associated with agricultural operations and just land ownership. And it can take pressure off of our public lands and resources by dispersing use to these locally run, well-managed sites on private property, all while maintaining the rural character and the natural characteristics of the properties that it's happening on. So in a really lower impact way than what we might think of when we think of camping currently. And I will pause there. Thanks for bearing with me on my tech challenges, and thanks for being prepared to share there. I really appreciate it. And I'm available if there's questions or information that I can provide that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Before we go to public comment, did you want to discuss the conversations you've had with commissioners, or when are we going to talk about what we've talked about with you?
Yeah, I could bring up a couple different points. There had been points about having, I believe it was a 10-acre minimum. There had been discussion, I think it was either 200 or 500 foot distance. I think we were in, the discussion was interested in the maximum of 9. I don't know if we hadn't quite discussed a number of people, but just so we could talk further on that. Fire safety was definitely very important. Our TOT was very important. Business permit was very important. Anything else you want to add?
Okay. And just for clarification for the public record, is a vendor required to do low impact camping? Do they have to use HipCamp, for example? Can they use any other vendor? No vendor?
They don't have to use. So what we're looking at is adopting a local ordinance to allow this on different properties throughout the county. And what standards do we want to have for our county, whether or not they use HipCamp. HipCamp is just one of a few different sites.
Okay, thank you. Public comment. Do we have any public comment in the chambers?
Yes, we do. Tim Borland, please approach the podium. You will have 3 minutes.
30 seconds? Just cut that down there.
3 minutes, wow. I don't know. Hi, Tim Borland. Thanks for having me. There's a lot that I could share, but I think high level, just know that thanks, you all had me a couple of months ago, and we've been doing hospitality for a long time. Cassandra and I have actually talked a number of times over the phone and texting back and forth. Hip Camp approached us a number of years ago and said, hey, if there's any interest or need for the general population to want to camp outside of the Pinnacles, Hip Camp is a great way to do that. So to answer your question, Robert, it's really one of the only ways folks are going to find a way to camp. It doesn't have to be the only way, but Hip Camp is Airbnb for camping. So we were a little bit reluctant because I didn't want to have a campground, but what I found out was that the folks on Hip Camp, anybody that's camping through Hip Camp, they are incredibly respectful. They are desperate to get out of the city. They want to get off the beaten path, and they want to find these really unique, cool experiences where they could camp and touch the local community. So ranches, farms, vineyards. So if agritourism is something that is really important to San Benito County, just so you know, we've generated over $50,000 a year in camping through Hip Camp. We got shut down because I didn't know we had to have a use permit for that. So we also have to understand, the landowners need to understand what's really required. I've got a couple of neighbors around the Pinnacles National Park that shut down their camping. After I got shut down, I told them what happened, and they said, I'm shutting down. I don't want to get fined. I don't want to get red tagged. There are so many amazing opportunities. There are so many landowners in and around the Pinnacles National Park, but we are all land rich and cash poor. We don't have $6,000 and $8,000, $10,000 to file for a use permit, to then go do $20 or $50, or I was told $75,000 to do a CEQA review just to see if I could have camping in an acre in a section of my ranch. So the threshold is going to put a lot of people out of business. So if San Benito County is interested in getting more folks from the Bay Area, which is where a lot of these folks come from, that wouldn't normally get out to San Benito County but want to do so by way of camping and learn more about what we do and how we ranch and how we live and how we do everyday life, and go to the Pinnacles. And I send everybody to Tres Peños to either go see Naomi at Flapjacks or go see Carlos at the 19th hole. And they love to shop in Hollister. They love to eat and dine in Hollister. And then they love to come out with us and they help feed the animals and play with the bunnies. And I've had so many people ask me why they can't camp on my ranch right now. And I've told them because I've been shut down until we figure out how we can get this going again. So anyhow, I sure hope we can figure something out that works out well for San Benito County and for all those that want to come and stay and play and camp in San Benito County. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Any additional public comment?
There is no more public comment in chambers or via Zoom.
Okay, public comment is closed. Back to the commission. Commissioner Toledo, we'll go to the end.
Okay. First, I want to thank Cassandra for the presentation. It was great. I am definitely looking forward, and thank you, Tim, for coming up and speaking for under public comment. I do have some concerns. I think Tim kind of outlined the Airbnb app platform. So I'm guessing that's how you will, the Hip app, Camp app will probably platform be, right?
Yes, it's run very similarly to Airbnb.
Okay, great.
As an example.
Now, for safety, unfortunately, California has suffered through squatters. So let's say there's individuals who do not want to leave the property or the premises and don't want to pay. How are there procedures in how these individuals can get removed from the property, or maybe being a disturbance?
Yes, the local sheriff would be called to the scene, and they would be required to deal with an issue like that.
And what if like the squatter situation, what if the sheriff say they're camping, they're using that land, they have their property there for whatever reason, worst case scenario here?
That might be a Cassandra. I'm sure she's dealt with.
Yeah, Cassandra could definitely add to that. And I just want to put in there that there are, in what the ordinance that we create could add limitations to
Okay.
stays. But I'll let Cassandra also add to what she's seen.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. It's not something that we see very often on our platform, in part because our platform is designed not to support bookings beyond a certain amount of time without explicit approval from the landowner. And because of the community that is booking these sites, it's not something that we have seen. But something that other counties are doing just to head off that risk is implementing a maximum length of stay, right? An enforceable provision in the ordinance for example, 14 days, which is what is pretty common on public lands, or for the 30 days or fewer, right? The way that they're defined for other short-term stays in their county code.
Okay, maybe we can add something to the guidelines there within the county. Thank you.
Any specific recommendations?
I'd be comfortable with 30. I mean, if we're trying to encourage it, let's go with a maximum and see what happens.
Okay.
Rather than cutting it short and booting people out of the county because there's only so many places to camp in San Benito County. If you have a comment, can you please come to the
Yeah, he came
podium?
comment. Please come up.
So it's on the record.
We just need you on microphone.
We want to hear your thoughts since you are a user of the system.
Oh, he says what he needs.
What
Thank
your
you,
thoughts
Tim.
are regarding the number of days.
I will keep it very short and succinct. Two things. One, absolutely Cassandra said, but also two, the platform is great because the user has a profile. And just like Airbnb, any hip camp camper has a profile. And if they ruin or abuse their privileges camping on my land, I can give them a 1-star review. I can write about how bad my experience was with them, and nobody else will let them, hopefully nobody else will let them camp. Likewise, if somebody tries to book at my place, I can go look at their profile before I accept their booking. If their average star rating is 1 or 2 stars, anything lower than 4, I may not want to take them. And I can read their reviews from past landowners. Hey, here's why you shouldn't let this person book on your property.
Okay.
So that's incredibly helpful. And then I think we in general, we're closer to the 7-day mark. The 30-day is a little too close to me. I'm pretty leery about what I can do. The great thing about HipCamp and Airbnb is book for 7 days. If you really got to stay longer, rebook. But that way it's a new transaction and the clock is started over again.
Okay.
So that's the way I like to handle it, just to see.
Inclined to agree with you.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
I just have one more
Back to
question.
Commissioner Toledo.
And I would like to request a minimum of 10 acres, if that's possible. 5 acres, I feel that is too small.
I would concur with the acreage, and thank you. And Commissioner Way, what are your thoughts?
I had a couple of issues, and none of which are deal breakers, but I'm not in agriculture, okay, but some of my fellow commissioners are or have been and have more experience with it than I do. I know that there's a misconception, I think, in the minds of some of the general public that, for example, an organic farm maybe doesn't use pesticides, and that's not true. They do use pesticides in large part, and in fact, in some cases, those pesticides can be even more toxic than some of the non-organic pesticides that are in use. But regardless, my concern is about exposure to agricultural chemicals, even on an organic farm. I guess that would be the responsibility of the property owner to make sure that they weren't exposing their campers to such risks.
Well, we could put a setback that from any farming where there's sprays applied, that there has to be a certain number of feet away from those. But I would think the property owner wouldn't want to subject their guests to any kind of spray.
Well, there'd be insurance issues involved too. I mean, somebody could theoretically say they were injured by the exposure and so forth. So, yeah.
Especially in California.
Okay. And the other issue that I have, I'm a grandparent of a teenager with special needs, and I wonder about ADA issues with regards to, for instance, access to the portable restrooms and such. Are there specific things that need to be done or that we should consider writing into the requirements that would accommodate people with special needs?
Well, I don't even think the facilities are required, right? That's kind of the point of the low impact, is that you bring in your own facilities? Is that how the camping works?
Usually they're renting toilets or washrooms, and you can actually rent ADA compliant.
So the porta potties.
Yeah.
They are
Oh, okay.
ADA compliant.
Okay.
So just put that put that in the ordinance that
Yeah.
porta potties are a certain amount, at least one.
At least one, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
One ADA compliant porta potty.
That works.
Yep. And the last thing that I had some concern on, and this is, I guess, more of a nit point, but the statistics from Mendocino County from 2020 and 2021, I would point out that during that time frame there was probably an artificially increased demand for outdoor recreation that was isolated from other people. And I think we all know the reason for that during 2020 and 2021 being pandemic years, but I would caution that maybe not extrapolate too much from those. But presumably you have numbers by now from 2022 and so forth that indicate that the demand continues to grow.
I would agree with the comment regarding the years and the growth year over year.
Okay.
What are your thoughts, if any, regarding the minimum acreage that Commissioner Toledo?
Oh, I would agree.
Okay.
You know, I think 10 is an appropriate number.
Okay. Commissioner Ringhayden?
I agree with that. Also,
Are you speaking to the mic?
I wanted to ask, if you don't mind, sir, I'd like to ask you a question. It's just about RV campers. Have you allowed any RV campers on your property?
Yes, sir, but we promote dry camping only. So no septics, no water, no power.
You don't provide any hookup?
Nope.
Do you have a minimum size or a maximum size for the RV?
It would be maximum to the road access, but our ranch is plenty big and wide enough. We've had 40-foot diesel pushers come in, and the road's plenty wide, and we keep it serviced and scraped and mowed, and so there's no issue with them getting in. We have plenty of signs and travel. Like, I don't want somebody coming in and getting stuck either, right? Because then I got to pull them out. So I guess your question might be just in general, should you have a limit on the size? And I would say that in general, Hip Camp, like, they're going to cater to your RV van, like your camper van. It's rare that you get a diesel pusher trying to book a site on Hip Camp.
It seems that tents and big RV campers don't seem like they make great neighbors.
Right. So if you remember, I had shared we actually have 9 sites. We have tent camping, and then we have 2 of these glamping tents that we built from Rainier Tents, and then we have a couple of just dirt pads where people can park their RV, and typically it's nothing more than maybe a 26-footer, just your Cruise America, right? Something you can rent, or some of these little camper vans that you can rent. So I think if you're looking for a limitation, I think probably putting something like not having maybe if you want to do like a 28 or 30 foot could be like a reasonable length if you were looking for that as a limitation. But otherwise, mostly it's tent campers and glamping. So that's where we do offer glamping, and as Cassandra said, that's a big deal. And having the glamping tents up off the ground and the platform, and we have 3 sets of bunk beds in each tent with a little futon couch, and it's just a really nice little cozy setup. The beds are all pre-made. We provide all the linens. We've got power for a little lantern and a fan, and it's a really nice cozy setup. So you don't have to fly in or come down with tents and sleeping bags and all the rest. We provide the basic cozy, comfy, above ground experience, and then you can bring your stove and whatnot. But anyhow, sorry, I know I diverted from your question.
No, I thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Okay.
And one last thing, have you had any issues with fires?
We have not, and this is something I tried to bring up the last time I was here. Is look, a lot of the way we make our money is running cattle. I have no interest in trying to burn my ranch down. I'll lose a lot of my income. So I've had sleepless nights. I've spent nights going around and just making sure that nobody's started fires that they weren't supposed to start. And because, again, one of the limitations, or I think one of the requirements Cassandra had mentioned, is having on-site managers, and that's something that also too our guests are usually on their best behavior, because this is my family, my wife and my kids live here, this is our home and our livelihood, and they recognize that they're coming to stay at our home, and so they're always very respectful. But we have one communal fire pit, and fire is life-giving and unfortunately life-taking, but having one communal fire pit where folks can gather, and we've literally had people camp with us and they come sit around the fire and they realize they work at the same company together and they know a lot of the same people, and before you know it, people are communing and they're conversing and they're connecting, which is just so awesome to see. And they come to this podunk little ranch in South San Bernardino County from the Bay Area, and they all realize that they have these common threads and they know each other. But it all happens around the campfire. I call it the campfire of confession, because after a couple of drinks, they're confessing a lot of things. But we have one communal campfire, and I can manage that, right? Like you can manage, and I have a fire extinguisher. Charlie came down, made sure I've got a fire extinguisher right there, and we have one communal fire pit, and people can come gather there, and it's just a really special experience and opportunity. So I want to try to at least provide one communal fire pit that's safe and fun, but opportunity for folks to connect and gather, but not just let people recklessly start fires around the ranch. But I do not want to burn down my property and my grass for my cows, so I am very careful, and we do drive around and do checks on the fire.
Thank you.
And I imagine every landowner is going to be the same way, right? They're all going to be very careful about sharing their property and not losing their assets at the same time, right?
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Commissioner Scagliotti?
Yes,
Just real quick, I wanted to add that one of the things we could build into the ordinance is that if you were to allow a communal fire, that they would have to do they'd schedule a fire inspection prior to use.
With CAL FIRE?
CAL FIRE or Hollister Fire, depending.
Where it
depends.
is.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Commissioner Scagliotti?
yes, I think the maximum occupancy be no more than 7 days and then rebook, like Tim said. I think you get it too far out, then people will start taking advantage of it, is my opinion. And maybe 10 acres might be too small. Maybe we might want to consider 20 acres, a little bit bigger. And we have more room for people. It's just a thought.
With the limit of 9 or fewer campsites per property, what does per property mean? Is that per parcel, per applicant, owner? What is that defined as?
It's defined as per parcel, but there are variations. You could do, one site. Different jurisdictions do different things. You could do one site per acre. You could do, not a maximum of this many people. There's different ways to, or as long as they're meeting site distance to residences or property lines, and not have a site per acre requirement. So.
Okay. Any other questions, Commissioner Scagliotti?
Site per acre, so if we went that way, say if a fellow has 1,000 acres, how many sites you want to allow out there? I mean, you got to be careful that way too. We don't want to get it too big.
Senate bill allows for 9 campsites.
Maximum.
Yes, and I'll let Cassandra correct me
Okay,
if I'm.
that's good. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Well, you're the expert witness this evening.
Well, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm obviously very passionate about helping my neighbors that, like me, want to share their land with locals that want to come out and camp and hike the Pinnacles. I'd like to suggest that maybe there's a way to have a stair step. Just, it's not an all or nothing. If you don't have 10 acres or 20 acres, you can't have camping, but perhaps even on 10 acres, could you have 2 sites in the backyard? And then if 6 acres, could there be a progression, right, where it's not an all or nothing, but we think about there's just fewer sites, for smaller land, but it's still now granted, where we're at, very few people have 6 or 10 acres. Most of the ranches are 2 to 10,000 acres, but just in case, or if it was per parcel, and the guy said, hey, this is the parcel for my camping, but it's a 5-acre parcel, and you said, oh, well, even though you're on 5,000 acres, your parcel is only 5 acres, you can only have 2 campsites. So I would just want to offer maybe an opportunity to think through, could we have a way to increase the camping as you had more land, but still, even if somebody only had 5 acres and they wanted 1 or 2 campsites, could that or would that be okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can I add something?
Commissioner Toledo.
Well, I suggested 10, because I've been doing some investigation on acreage. So when I feel that 10 is a good amount, but I also don't mind having up to 9 little campsites within those 10. But it also depends on how individuals feel comfortable. I think people come together naturally, so even if they're still close by, it's just a community, camping. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Oh, while this thing is agendized, let's flesh it out a little tonight.
Is there any recommendation on number of people per campsite? There's 9.
I'd say 6 maybe at the most, because a family of 4 or some kids with friends.
6 is acceptable. Okay.
6.
Is there a consensus from the commission? 6 per campsite? They can always book 2 if they have a bigger family. And I had one question. Going back to Hip Camp, do we have an agreement with them to collect and remit the TOT on behalf of their folks? Or is this left up to the individual property owners? I don't like that. I'd rather do like we do with the other vendors and have them collect and remit.
Cassandra, are you online still?
I am. We don't have an agreement with San Benito County. Thank you for your question. There are jurisdictions that we do have such agreements with, and so would be happy to talk about what that would look like in San Benito. Currently, landowners specify the tax rate for each of their sites. We add that automatically onto each booking, and the individuals are responsible for remitting depending on the requirements of their county. But we do have agreements similar to the ones that you've described with other jurisdictions. So that's certainly something we could.
The county TOT is 12%. I would rather just be forced and done through the vendor, whatever vendor it happens to be. I think that should be a requirement rather than leaving it up to the individual owners to comply with the law.
So staff can work with Hip Camp and bring that back.
And any other vendor that we're aware of that operates in the county, I'd like to see agreements.
Don't leave it up to an individual landowner.
Yeah. And then if there is no vendor, then we have to deal with the individual person. But it's easier to use a vendor since they have the system set up. Then I just don't want to act like the county is giving a blessing to any particular vendor, since we can't.
Hip Camp is the only one that do this.
So for the record, from the SANS, for anyone on Zoom, it was stated that Hip Camp is the only one that's booking campsites. Thank you.
Okay. So if we can try to work with Hip Camp and the county to get an agreement together, that would be fantastic.
Yes, staff will pursue. Or would you like to come back up, Tim?
Cassandra would like to say something. She had her hand raised.
I just wanted to clarify there are other platforms, and I would be happy to share information on kind of the state of the space, if that would be helpful as these conversations continue.
Yes, please.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Tim, did you have something to add regarding that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that Airbnb does allow for some of that as well, but I do, as a host, I do prefer focusing on just starting with one vendor. So I do appreciate the idea of saying, hey, if you're going to camp, use Hip Camp. That way, the county can control the regulations and the process by which all that happens, and it can happen through Airbnb, which you already have a relationship with well.
An agreement.
So
Yes.
agreement with, yes.
Yes. Important to me. Make agreements.
Important
Okay.
to all of us.
Yep.
You brought it up.
We can also, sorry, real quick, we can also build into the ordinance that if they're not, if the landowner is not using one of these sites, then they're still required to meet the county's TOT and prove that to staff.
Yes.
How do you police that?
Well, the assessor's office does have a way to pull and look into that information. We've done it before.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So let's go back to the minimum acreage. Do we want to try to stair step and you want to go down to 5 and say 1 site? You want to start at 10 and say 2 sites? What do we want to do? Let's try to get staff some direction for that particular issue. I'm okay going smaller as long as we limit.
I'll go down as low as 5 with 1 campsite per 5 acre parcel.
Okay, and then 10 2
10 to 2, and then for bigger, then let it go up to
the 9
to the 9
with a 6 per.
with a 6 per.
Is that acceptable to the group?
Sorry, real quick clarification. At what
Okay,
point
start
does
at-
it?
Start at 5.
Okay.
With 1 campsite.
Mm-hmm.
2 with 10.
Okay.
And then anything bigger than that, they can have
The max.
the max.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
And
One
Mhm.
campsite.
Because not every.
Because we get
yeah.
2 people. 5 acres is not that big by the time you have your house and where you're gonna live, and then in the back for, I'm just thinking how big 5 acres is. It's not that big.
No,
It's not.
not a lot
That's
of
why I was
privacy.
kind of
But
leaning against it,
if
but
you have something up Cienega, there might be a there are actually, I think there are 5 acre
well, people
parcels, so
could
then
stay
they
up
could
there,
have
yeah.
one.
They can have one.
So the 5 acres and the 10 acres are within where the home is, within that same area. Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify, at 11 acres, you can then have 9 sites.
Correct.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Covered that, density limits, parking. The fire, I would like to hear back from CAL FIRE and Hollister. But I do like the idea of the community fire pit, and then there's the appropriate clearance around the fire pit so that people don't accidentally start a blaze, because you can't be watching them 24/7, and you never know what people do, and they may be coming from the city and have no concept of, oh, well, here's a sparkler, and then there goes everyone's ranches. So we have to be cognizant of the fact that you don't supervise them 24/7.
And there's a question, who would be in charge of the community fire pit?
Yeah.
Property owner is responsible ultimately. If something happens, it's
Yeah.
basically on them. Their neighbors will have issues if they lose their land too,
I
or
mean,
their grass.
You could have issues potentially with some people who don't want quite such a big darn fire and all the heat and
Mhm.
smoke. And how would we control that? I know it sounds weird, but if you've camped a lot, these issues come up.
Mhm.
It's like that guy's fire is way too big. I don't like it.
I can connect. I can connect with fire, and then I can send out the requirements, because depending on if you're in a high fire hazard area or different times of the year, there's actually some different regulations. So I can pull all that and I can send it to you,
Okay.
and then I can get further feedback.
Okay. Commissioner
Like the
Toledo?
community fire.
No, go.
I was gonna ask him some more.
My question is, if there's one community fire and then there's 5 acres from that spot, there's another campsite, how do the individuals stay warm? I mean, I don't go camping often, so.
Go to the community
Yeah.
fire.
Yeah.
Meet some new people.
Yeah.
One fire pit and that's it.
That's it.
Can we write that in there?
I'd like to.
Only a responsible person or landowner has the fire ring. Nobody else can have a fire. Can that be written in?
Yep, we can write that in, and then I can also make sure that all the fire code regulations are
And
met.
the size, how big is yours? Jim? How big is yours?
6 by 6 or something.
And you wouldn't want anybody else having a separate fire other than your community fire on your property.
No, that's not where he lives.
It's too much to watch
Well, yeah. I think it's-
and to manage.
The communal fires only.
I think
And
so.
you have to.
I agree with that.
And then
Yep,
I agree with it.
Thank you.
We might have to also, there's a lot of people that now come up with propane fire pits, so that's also a big difference. Like the parks might say you can't have wood, but you can have propane. So nowadays, it's really common for folks to get a little
Gas powered.
gas powered dish,
Backyard one.
little deal that the kids just want to do the marshmallows. So is that considered a campfire? And so that might be something too where we have to.
There's no embers from a propane
No, there's
fire,
not.
which is
Right.
safer than a wood fire.
Right, and I prefer that, if someone says, hey, can I have a little propane fire pit so my kids can do marshmallows before we go to bed, that feels to me pretty reasonable. So I'm more okay with that than dry pine wood throwing embers. And so also too, that's really fun. Still, it's fun for the kids, and folks like to sit around still even a propane fire pit.
Okay. I think maybe we can work on that language, one communal fire that's wood fire, and then we'll have to maybe figure out something regarding
I do
individual
have
propane.
one. I'm just scared of being cold, so if
Which is where this could be really helpful, because you could sit around the little
once
propane fire
once
pit.
inside your tent though, if people have, I don't know,
What?
do
Sleeping.
they have like a warm, like, no, there's nothing.
A
There's
tube
Fire
can-
in your tent?
no, not a fire in your tent.
Wool socks
But I'm
and a
saying,
toque. Yeah.
is there a heater that, I don't,
So
No,
you
'cause
need
you'd
to,
have to have a generator.
you need to say, yeah.
just making sure.
RV camping is in your
Gotta bring
future.
a big, thick
Yeah,
sleeping
bring the RV or stay in our glamping
Yeah.
tent.
This
This might be a little off topic, but
I'm okay with that.
And
but
Propane fire pit's cool, yeah,
Yeah.
I'll go with that.
okay, back to Tim.
sorry.
Yes, sir.
It's a prior comment, but prior response to a prior comment. With COVID, people wanted to get out and camp, and I think what happened was people discovered it was a really cool thing, and it's not slowing down. We're getting people constantly that are asking us, and we are constantly turning people away. Well, now we're in a pause right now, but honestly, like, we've been busting at the seams, and I could probably have 18 campsites full all the time. So, or 20.
Yeah.
So just so you know, it's not slowing down, and especially with the Pinnacles National Park, we're 15 minutes away from the entrance, and that place is busting at the seams, and they don't have enough room for camping. And now you're seeing people camp on the side of Highway 25 just about every time I go home. I guarantee you tonight, when I go home, every single turnout, there's going
Oh.
to be a car or a van.
They're at the
Pulled
church
over.
pretty often.
What's that?
They're at Immaculate Conception fairly often
Oh,
as
they
well.
are? Okay, yeah. So there's just not enough room down there at the Pinnacles. So the demand is there, but the supply is not. So if we can figure out how to get the supply to meet and or exceed the demand,
Well, we're going to try
gonna be
quickly.
rocking and rolling. Hey, I'm here to help.
Okay,
Whatever I
thank
can
you.
do.
Thank you.
Commissioner Scagliotti?
Yeah, I had one question.
Oh,
How
sorry,
soon-
Tim.
How soon before you can get up and running?
Well, as soon as we adopt the
As soon
ordinance.
as we adopt all these ordinances, is that what you're waiting
Yeah.
on us? Okay.
Yes, as soon as I don't need a CEQA review, and
Okay.
because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get rid of the need for a CEQA review and just have a county ordinance, yeah, and
Yes.
not having to do a whole use
Gotta get
permit.
this done.
Because
Okay.
I've got neighbors that have said, I can't afford $8,000 for a use permit.
'Cause, yeah,
I
you have
can't
a
do
lot of
that. I
neighbors
don't have
that
that kind of
do
money.
this.
So if we can get rid of that, we're rocking and rolling.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
I
I
just want to add real quick to that I think staff's direction and some of the comments that I talked with the commissioners is to allow something that's permitted by right. So coming up with an ordinance that's permitted by
Mhm.
right, they don't need to come through planning. They just need to adhere to the standards and requirements. So
even better, get government out of the way.
Yeah, get it going.
As far as the types, whether it's a camp, a tent, or a yurt, or an RV, I don't want to limit what type or the length of the vehicle. If it's up to the property owner. If you don't know that you can't get a diesel pusher on your property, maybe you shouldn't own the property. I don't know. And as far as zoning, have we fleshed out what zoning types we're allowing this in? Or do we need to?
I think we had discussed and looking at our AP, our AR, our rural, and potentially rural residential or rural transitional. But again, if we have those acreage requirements, there's going to be just properties that won't meet that, and then they won't be able to. So we could basically, and how the Senate Bill 620 also, it's like non residential or commercial. There's like requirements in there. So I think the idea was to be permissible.
So maybe we shouldn't include that at all then, if we're gonna have the acreage minimum. That way, if we ever do update our general plan and we change all the zoning and we divvy it up even more, then maybe we don't wanna do that, cause then we'll have to forget that we have to go back and change this ordinance to make it comply. I mean,
We would need to probably go through ordinances anyhow, so, I think it would be good to at least put in there what areas you can't.
Non-residential. This
Yeah.
applies to non-residential. Let's
something-
let's do something like that and leave it more
Okay.
broad than.
Yeah, we don't want it in residential, some guy with
Yeah.
one acre parcel and trying to have a campground in the
Yeah.
backyard, no.
I just don't want to, you know how we don't catch up with things in this county? I just don't want to pigeonhole us into something and then down the road be like, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
And also,
Anyway, 200-foot standoff.
So don't we have
Setbacks.
Yeah, we only have
Setbacks
200 foot
would be-
setbacks anyhow?
Did we discuss setbacks?
yeah, I believe, I remember us discussing 200,
From an adjacent property owner's house? Or
yes.
is it property
Pro-
lines?
I think property line, and then I remember something about 500 acres from, like, someone's house, but that's up for discussion.
You do that.
200 feet from a property line and 500 feet from a neighboring house?
That's gonna kinda kick out anybody with a 5 acre parcel. Think about that. 5 acre parcel is 200 feet.
Be right in the middle?
You have to be right
Because it
dead
doesn't
set in the
include your
middle.
own house.
And what if they,
We don't want to be too
Ask
restrictive.
the, lady from Hip Camp, what is the average parcel size that they're using, please?
And what are their setbacks?
And what are their setbacks?
Cassandra, would you?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I can look at the average acreage for California. I don't have that data right in front of me. What we typically see from other counties in California is considering a 200-foot setback from offsite residences, I believe. And I can share some of those examples with staff, if that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. So 200 from an offsite residence, not property line, but
Okay.
We can make it what we want.
yeah,
Yeah,
we can.
well, we can make 200 feet
Sure.
outside.
Tim, would you like to come
Tim.
up?
All right.
Let's work
Thank
on
you.
this ordinance.
I'm gonna just try to juggle there's the sort of the legal side of things, and then there's the actual side, or just, I know we want to have all of the, we want to have all the procedures and protocols in place, but also just want to make sure everyone understands that, again, the really great thing about Hip Camp is if people are they're not good guests, like, you're not gonna welcome them back. And people are always very, very careful about making sure they can come back, especially if they really like their place. So if a neighbor is complaining to me because I have a campsite about my guests and I really want to have a campsite, and the neighbor says they're too loud and the guests were too loud, I'm going to be more motivated to make sure that I can have campers come back and be on my property. And so if the neighbors are if the campers are unruly, then I can just make sure that I'm also only allowing the folks to come to my place that, I mean, I don't want to hear them at night either, much less my neighbor. So I do think that in general there's a common, there's a common connection around, hey, we want people that want to enjoy their time during the day, but at night they're going to go to bed. They're not going to be up late bumping music and partying. And if they are, we're never going to welcome them back again. And we're going to do whatever we have to make sure our neighbors are okay with us being able to have folks camp here.
Okay.
I mean, that's obviously the hope and the dream.
Don't go too far.
Okay.
Amplified music. Do you have issues? Do you have amplified music, or did you have amplified music? I would
Have you
rather.
ever had amplified music?
Not in the campground, no, because again, I mean, it's almost better to have people camping near each other because they recognize and they're respectful of their neighbors. And again, when people are going camping, they want to hear the crickets, they want to hear the cows bellowing, they want to see the stars. They're not camping because they're not going to Chowchilla, right? They're not going to a rock concert out in Palm Desert. They're trying to get away from everything. So a few times over the years, we've had people that were a little unruly, and I've had to shut them down, and some of my other campers told me, and I made sure that the other folks know that if they didn't shut it down, they were going to have to leave. But in general, folks are pretty respectful. They're coming out camping for the reason to get away from the noise.
Okay.
And to unplug and disconnect. They're not going to camp to make noise. They're going to camp to get away from the noise. Which actually is another really, the thing that's really attractive about Hip Camp is they really like the idea of not having to go to the national and state parks, where you do have people that tend to be a bit more unruly and disrespectful at the parks, and don't need to go there. But the park creeper thing has come up with a lot of families. A lot of moms want to go somewhere where they don't have to worry about park creepers and their kids. So they really like going to a family camping establishment that's a lot safer and quieter.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
Okay.
Any other issues we need to cover?
And I could just add, we could add no amplified music.
I would be okay with that,
Yeah.
just to nip it in the bud.
And should we have like a time of night where the music should be shut off?
Well, there's the noise.
And that's what I was just gonna say. Maybe a little radio, a little small radio, but at a certain time.
Yep, and we can include that.
Refer to the county noise ordinance, is that?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, 10 o'clock. Yeah.
Is that acceptable to the group? Okay. Did you need any other direction on any other portions of the ordinance?
No, so we discussed minimum acreage, we discussed setbacks, we discussed zoning, we discussed occupancy, we discussed types of camping, fire safety, minimal infrastructure noise, registration and occupancy tax. I can't think of anything else.
Okay. And any other last thoughts from commissioners?
I had a last thought.
Commissioner
And I hate
Ringhaden.
to beat this to death, but if you're 200 feet away from somebody else's property line and it's cold out and you got both heat pumps going, that makes a little bit of noise. I don't know if you can hear it from.
Yeah, what's the heat pump?
We don't, we're
So
not
if you have a
fancy.
big- If you have a big RV and you have these big heaters up on top, those are heat pumps, and those are kind of loud. And the reason I was just camping and I felt bad because there was people in a tent right over there, but it was cold. I put that on and it's loud.
We should have got a bigger jacket.
Yeah. Or something to stay
So,
warm.
not that 200 feet it's a good distance, but for maybe for the RVs, it might be want to be further away from a property line or residence.
I don't know if we want to add that to the ordinance, or maybe see what happens and leave it up to the property owners. If it becomes an issue, then we'll have to deal with it, but.
Yeah,
You
and
can always
you wouldn't
revise
want it
ordinance.
written in for all times of the year either, because I mean, you wouldn't need to restrict an RV from being a certain distance in the property line in the middle of August when they're not gonna be running the heaters anyway.
Air conditioner.
Well, that's true. That is true. Yeah.
I'd rather be less restrictive and find out if we have a problem, and we can always, at some point, update the ordinance. We probably will anyway.
I thought we agreed with neighboring residents. That's what they said they use, 200 feet from the neighboring,
200 feet from a neighboring resident.
But not from the property line, from the residence.
from the residents, so that gives you more room.
They better push their camping site over a little bit.
Well, that's why I would suggest basing on the property line, because if you base on the residence and somebody's built one of those glamping sort of units, there's cost involved there. If you say now I built a
Oh,
residence
like
on the
the
neighboring
yurt?
property, and might affect
That
that.
makes sense.
I would consider that.
Property line.
So 100 feet from the property line?
Well, you're gonna have to for a private acre parcel.
From the property line.
Yeah, the distance is up to the,
Everyone's
yeah,
property's gonna be different, the shape, whether it's a valley. I mean, we can't legislate everything.
True, and the properties are large enough where you think they would, account for that. but-
That's the hope, yep.
So just nix the 200 from a residence.
And stay 100 from
Okay.
the property line.
Perfect.
And leave it up to the owner's discretion. Hopefully they'll be wise enough not to cause problems.
There'll be a little common
Do
sense
we need
involved,
to
huh?
say anything about setbacks from agricultural production areas, or do we leave that to the owner, to keep the people safe?
Well, there's laws regarding,
Yes, and I'm glad he brought that up.
isn't it like 1,000 feet? I mean,
Yeah, you can't. You gotta kick them all out.
it,
Let me think.
it can't be on
I was just wondering
productive
about
ag
the
land?
agricultural production.
Yeah,
active farming?
Yeah, no, not on any active farming properties, on how you can word that, but like the ranch where we are, I would not allow it because of food safety. People have a dog, and then if they take the dog for a walk,
Oh, yeah, good
Yeah.
point.
no.
But you'd hope the property owner would have the wherewithal to figure out that one, that they don't want to undercut somebody that's leasing their land for farming, or they themselves are the farmers, and they would be like, oh yeah, that's not a good
Yeah.
concept.
Is it just, can I ask a clarifying question? Is it just for specific kinds of crops? Like, is it
Food?
different from a vineyard to
A vineyard
row
wouldn't
crop?
matter. I I'd say row crops. All row crops that are under the food safety guidelines. They
Okay.
have to be a certain distance or not at all.
Well, we could just.
I don't know any of those farmers that will allow that anyhow, so they're
And
not.
we're thinking, I think, south
I'm
of
thinking more
Hollister
South
anyway,
County
so.
myself anyway. Well, he's at that. It's not gonna be up here in North County. It'll be all around Pinnacles down there. That's what people are gonna wanna be. They're not gonna wanna be up here.
But if you could look into that and,
I think the simplest thing is that they have to adhere to setback requirements set under food safety state law, and I could just reference that. I'll
Okay.
find that code and
That's
reference it.
acceptable.
I think that's
Sounds
the
good.
easiest. Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all your contributions and conversation tonight, and thank you, Tim, for coming out.
Thank-
I appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank Tim, and
Miss
thank the
Sandra.
young lady. Commissioner Scagliotti,
How soon can you get this to us?
May?
I was instructed to be bringing back a revised zoning code ordinance at our May Planning Commission that did incorporate low impact camping.
Thank you.
That's the earliest meeting we're having, right?
Well, we got one the 30th.
The 30th could not include anything else
Okay.
on the agenda besides what's on there.
Okay, well, if we end up with a special
We have a
meeting
special
before
meeting?
the regular
You get it done in
meeting,
time?
could you
Let us
stick it
know.
on there?
If we did a special meeting,
No, just if we don't make a special one just for this,
Okay.
but if we end up with one, if you could add it to that, I think would be.
okay, staff is prioritizing this to expedite as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you. Last item, Title 23. Mr. Loop,
Alrighty, let's see.
stay in the loop with Loop.
No comment on that.
I like those videos.
I apologize in advance to your eyeballs for the videos. They're fun. They are fun. And it's good to start getting the message out. So.
Yes, sir.
For the record, we love them.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Speaking of roads, here we go. Thank you, commissioners. We are going to be discussing any subsequent revisions to the road standard code revisions that were discussed during the March 20th meeting. And so county staff met with each of the commissioners, 2 max per meeting, 2 commissioners per max at the meetings. And so these are going to be the changes that weren't presented previously. And so we just made some slight revisions per the request of the commissioners for consideration this evening. So the first one was under sidewalks, curb gutters, and conditions that the planning commissioners can make. And we basically, the request was to add the terms by condition. We previously had said resolution or adopted a specific plan, but the suggestion was to also say by condition, which makes sense. So this one was when you're in a urban area, you know, or next to an urban area or subdivision, and the commissioners would like to add a condition regarding sidewalks, curb and gutters that maybe just necessarily isn't in our road standards, but the commissioners by condition can say, we would also like to condition the project to put in sidewalk, curb and gutter, because perhaps the parcel being subdivided and considered, it's not zoned, or the street in front of it is not zoned to have a curb and gutter, but the next door neighbor already has a curb and gutter. So it gives the option for this to occur. And would the commission like me to pause per slide for discussion, or?
Keep on rolling, please.
Okay. All right, next one. This is regarding major subdivisions, which is 5 or more lots. And the revision was, I'll read kind of the whole sentence. All subdivisions of 5 or more lots shall have required frontage property dedications and frontage improvements for the full width of the road, or 50 feet of full width of the road per lot, whichever is greater, and shall be consistent in concept alignment and level of improvement with the circulation and transportation element of the general plan, area plan, master plan, and any applicable specific plan, as well as any streets and highways master plan. So that essentially, and I'll give you an example in a moment, if a subdivision has 100 lots, they would have to do a full width of improvement for 100 lots times 50 feet, which would be 5,000 feet, which is about a mile. If they had 1,000 lots, then it would be closer to 10 miles of improvements. So I'll just go through something real quick since you've directed me to continue. So one thing for us to consider, all of us, is, and this is taken from, some subdivision map act court cases, I guess you'd say. Basically, and our code also refers to proportionality of burden to the need created by the subdivision. So there was a case, it was actually for a city, where they conditioned some improvements, and the court said the city, which also applies to our county, or a county, must demonstrate required reasonable relationship between the conditions and the development's impact. The required rough proportionality between the burden and dedication was not present. And that's for a storm drain system. And so for 1,000 lots, such as San Juan Oaks or Santana Ranch, they have 1,000 lots, each of them plus or minus. This requirement, if implemented, would require 50,000 linear feet, which would be 9 miles of full width improvements. So that was that one. Then going down to minor subdivisions, 4 or fewer lots. All subdivisions of 4 or fewer lots shall have required frontage improvements, dedications, and frontage improvements limited to half the width of the frontage, consistent in concept, alignment, and level of improvement, with the circulation and transportation element of general plan, area plan, master plan, and any applicable specific plan, as well as any streets and highways master plan. At a minimum, these minor subdivisions shall be required to have required property dedications and driveway improvements along the width of their frontage. So the planning commission can go half width, or you can say, well, the minimum, you still have to do driveway improvements along your frontage for minor subdivisions. And I'll jump down to the bottom. If any further subdivision occurs within 5 years, then the requirement for improvement would be the previous section that we just read, because essentially what we're saying is, or the suggestion by the commissioners was, okay, you have a minor subdivision, 4 lots, but if those lots subdivide further within 5 years, that actually technically, if you look at the big picture over 5 years, there really should have been a major subdivision. So they're saying, okay, if something happens within 5 years and you want to subdivide further, you go back to becoming under the conditions and the purview requirements of a major subdivision. So that's what that bottom sentence is suggesting. And let's see, in lieu fees shall be deposited in a special underground account. Oh, this is for undergrounding overhead utilities. In lieu fees shall be deposited in a special undergrounding account to be used as recommended by the Planning Commission and approved by the Board of Supervisors for future undergrounding of utilities throughout the county. So if the project was conditioned to pay fees instead of undergrounding actual lines, that we'll start a fund essentially, and so we'll start accumulating funds so that when there's an area that has overhead lines, we'll have funds gathered that our planning commission can utilize, and then the Board of Supervisors would approve the use of those funds for undergrounding utility lines. So that was one of the suggestions. This one was just similar to kind of the previous minor subdivision. Whenever the county requires improvements for a division of land, which is a subdivision of 4 or fewer lots, such requirements shall be limited to the dedication of rights-of-way easements along half the width of their frontage improvements along the entire project site, and the construction of reasonable off-site and on-site improvements for parcels created. And the rest was already presented previously, which said you don't have to actually construct the improvements until you pull a permit, like a building permit for a home. Okay, so I will stop for
questions. Commissioners, have any questions? Commissioner Way.
Yeah, I have a hypothetical thing to ask how this would address, and it's an issue of fairness for one developer versus another. Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that you've got a developer that wants to put 1,000 lots right next to a big highway that goes more than 10 miles in each direction, and so we're requiring them to do 9.5 miles of full-width roadway improvements. Now, regardless of whether that number is high, low, average, in between, whatever, compare that to another developer that also wants to subdivide into 1,000 lots, but in his case to get to the area that he wants to subdivide, you first turn onto a half-mile-long dead-end street, and then you turn onto another half-mile-long dead-end street, and that's where his frontage is. Which street does he improve the 9.5 miles of?
It could get a bit complicated when you're going, further and further from your property. I concur. I guess it would be up to the purview of the planning commission if the condition was implemented to provide direction. Well, staff would look at the surrounding area, and we try to always focus impacts to the area where the subdivision is occurring. So staff would look at surrounding streets and make some judgments, and then the planning commission would have to provide their input on those.
That's where discretionary powers come into play. We have to weigh what's fair for each applicant. But we're trying to set some ground rules so that when people put in their applications, they have a basic understanding of what we're asking of them. So it's not a surprise. That's all we're trying to do. We always have the ability to defer or waive most of these things. Were there any other comments, questions?
Under Rich's hypothetical, couldn't we take that extra money and dedicate it to some other roads in the county that need to be improved?
Well, again, there the question is the nexus. Could the developer argue that I'm not having this impact, why do I have to pay this fee?
I would agree with Commissioner Way on that point. Yeah. There needs to be a nexus there, a connection between the exaction that's happening and the.
So it'd come down to the particular project. We can't write it into the ordinance to plan for each particular project, right? If they're two roads off of, say, Fairview.
Right, you want flexibility, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't want to be asking for improvement of a road across the,
town.
Across the town, right? It needs to be relatively close to it. Right?
Okay. Very good. Public comment. Is there any public comment in the chambers?
There is no public comment in chambers, and there is no public comment via Zoom. Sorry, I was giving someone a chance to raise their hand if they wanted to, but no hands. Okay.
Unusual. Okay. Public comment is closed. Back to the commission. I'll just say I'm happy with all those revisions. Any other comments, questions? Okay, Commissioner Ringhayden's good. Commissioner Scagliotti?
I'm good with them.
Commissioner Way?
I still have qualms about the linear feet requirement, and I find myself surprisingly opposing the magnitude of this. It seems excessive to me, but if it's the will of the commission to do this, then that's fine. I agree there needs to be a number, and it needs to be written into the ordinance. I just question whether this is the right number, but as I said, if others.
Do you have a number you prefer?
75% of this, maybe.
One thing to note that might help is whenever a subdivision, and it's usually major subdivisions, create 50 or more trips per day, they have to do a traffic study, and that's part of their application, and so that might help make some of these determinations as well. But the traffic study is supposed to indicate the impacts from a subdivision. So
okay, and we would we would have access to that traffic study in terms of before we decided what to do about the conditional use permit, I guess.
Correct. Yeah, and we will make sure that the traffic counts are very current and the new traffic count is performed for that project.
And as long as we have the ability to waive this requirement or to modify it and make it a little bit smaller depending upon the particular project, then I'm fine with it.
Okay. Very good. What do we need?
We need a motion, don't we?
Yeah, so
a resolution to send this to the board, or what do we?
Yes, you would recommend this to be implemented as an ordinance, and then it would go to the Board of Supervisors, I believe. Is that correct?
We don't
okay, and I apologize. We would actually bring a resolution to this commission, and then if you pass a resolution, then it would go to the board of supervisors. Do you want to come up here and?
For me?
As we did with the duties, I would bring it back as a resolution in a formalized, finalized sort of
Okay.
iteration.
And we also have to notice to the paper as well.
Okay, so,
And I would point out that since this is quasi-legislative, the requirements for the quorum and the requirements for passing are a little bit different than they would be if we were doing the quasi-judicial.
mhm. Okay, so there's staff direction to bring it back. Do we have a consensus? Or do we need a motion to bring it back in May for I think it's just consensus, right?
Yeah, you need a consensus. Yeah,
Okay.
direction, what have you. Yeah,
I
either way is
think-
fine.
So we bring it back at the May meeting, the consensus, to adopt this resolution?
To adopt
Adopt
as a
this as a
resolution,
resolution.
right? Mhm.
Okay. Okay. I think we're good. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Commissioner announcements? Does anyone have anything to announce?
No.
None. Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.